You're standing in front of a mirror. You're getting dressed. You glance down for half a second and see them. Two small circles on your chest that do absolutely nothing. If you're a man, you've never thought twice about them. But the real answer for why they're there is far stranger than you've ever imagined. It's not a leftover. It's not useless. It's evidence of something happening inside your mother's body before you even had a sex. Think about that for a second. Before you were a boy or a girl, you were just a plan, a blueprint, and that blueprint came with nipples already built in. Here's where it gets strange. For the first 6 to 7 weeks of human development, every embryo follows the exact same template. Same tissue, same structures forming in the same order. There is no male path and no female path yet. There's just one path, shared by everyone who has ever been born. Nipples form during this window, long before hormones decide anything, long before a single gene switches on to say, make testes or make ovaries. The tissue that will become nipples appears on what's called the mammary ridge, sometimes nicknamed the milk line, a faint strip that runs from the armpit down to the groin in every embryo, everywhere, every time. So why does the switch happen later instead of earlier? Because evolution doesn't build efficient systems. It builds systems that work, using whatever's already there. The developmental biologist Scott Gilbert has spent decades studying exactly this kind of shared blueprint. And one lesson runs through his research again and again. The body doesn't design two separate templates, one for each sex. It builds one shared template first, then edits it. The edit comes from a single gene. It's called SRY, and it sits on the Y chromosome. Around week 7 or 8, if SRY is present and active, it flips a switch that starts producing testosterone, and the shared template begins to diverge. Genitals differentiate. Certain tissues grow, others stop. But the nipples? They've already formed. The switch flips too late to erase them. The gene itself wasn't identified until 1990 by a team led by British geneticist Peter Goodfellow. Before that, scientists knew something on the Y chromosome triggered male development, but they didn't know what or when. Goodfellow's discovery filled in the missing piece, and it explained, almost as a side effect, why male nipples exist at all. They're not a mistake, they're a timing problem. The body commits to nipples before it even knows which sex it's building. Now here's the part that should really catch you off guard. This isn't just a curiosity about anatomy. It's a window into how evolution actually works, and it rarely gets the credit it deserves. In 1979, evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould, working with geneticist Richard Lewontin, published a paper that changed how scientists think about traits like this. They argued that not every feature of a living thing is there because it was individually useful. Some features are just architectural side effects, the biological equivalent of a decorative arch that only exists because of how a building structure happens to fit together. Gould and Lewontin borrowed the word spandrel from architecture, the term for the curved triangular space that forms almost by accident where two arches meet. Male nipples are a textbook spandrel. Nobody designed them, nobody needed them. They exist because the female template came first in development, and building a male on top of it was cheaper, biologically speaking, than starting from scratch. Cheaper. That's the key word. Evolution is not an engineer chasing perfection. It's more like a contractor working with a tight budget and materials already on site. Duplicate structures cost energy. A body that already knows how to grow nipple tissue doesn't need a separate, sex-specific plan for skipping it in males. It's simpler, biologically, to grow the tissue in everyone and let hormones decide later whether it develops fully. So the next time you hear someone joke that male nipples are pointless, you can tell them the truth. They're not pointless. They're proof. Proof that every human being, male or female, starts from the exact same script. But there's a twist hiding inside this twist. Male nipples aren't always completely inactive. Under specific hormonal conditions, some men can produce a small amount of milk. It's rare, and it's usually linked to a hormone called prolactin, spiking due to certain medications, tumors, or extreme starvation. Historical accounts describe it happening in famine and in prisoner of war camps, where the body's hormonal balance became so disrupted that lactation briefly switched on in men. The tissue, dormant for a lifetime, was capable the whole time. It just never received the signal. That should shift how you see your own body. What looks finished, fixed, and settled is actually closer to a system on standby, waiting for instructions that, for most men, will never come. There's a term for this kind of leftover capability. Biologists call it a vestigial trait, but that word can be misleading. Vestigial doesn't mean broken. It doesn't mean useless in every sense. It means the structure is inherited from a shared developmental pathway, and it can still, under the right conditions, do the job it was originally built for. Your appendix, once dismissed as pure evolutionary debris, is now understood by immunologists to house beneficial gut bacteria, a kind of biological reserve tank. Male nipples fit the same pattern. Quiet most of the time, fully wired underneath. Think about how counterintuitive that is. A trait can look completely dormant for an entire human life, and still be one hormonal signal away from switching on. And this pattern isn't limited to nipples. Your body is full of shared blueprints, edited late rather than designed twice. The clitoris and the penis develop from the exact same embryonic tissue, called the genital tubercle, before diverging based on hormone exposure. The labia and the scrotum share an origin too, from a structure called the labioscrotal swelling. What becomes ridged, fused skin in one sex remains open, soft skin in the other. Different outcomes, one shared origin. Why does this matter beyond biology class? Because it dismantles a myth that runs deep in how people talk about men and women. The myth that male and female bodies are two separate designs, built independently for separate purposes. They're not. They're one shared design, branching late, shaped by a handful of genetic switches and hormonal cues that arrive after the foundation is already poured. This is where the modern mirror comes in. You've probably heard someone describe men and women as though they're built from entirely different blueprints, different wiring, different hardware. But your own chest quietly disproves that idea every single day. Two small circles of tissue, sitting there since before you had a sex to speak of, are a permanent record of how much men and women actually share before biology decides to draw any lines at all. It's easy to assume that difference comes first and that similarity is the exception. Nipples flip that assumption on its head. Similarity comes first, every single time. Difference is the late addition, stitched on by a handful of genes and hormones working with borrowed material. Your body isn't proof of two separate designs competing against each other. It's proof of one design, patient enough to wait almost 2 months before deciding which direction to take. That patience is easy to miss, because by the time you're old enough to notice your own chest in a mirror, the decision has long since been made. The branching point closed decades ago. All that's left is the evidence, sitting there in plain sight, unnoticed for an entire lifetime. Consider what that means the next time you catch your reflection. That small, ordinary detail on your chest isn't decoration, and it isn't an error. It's a signature. A signature written by your body in its earliest weeks, before hormones, before identity, before anything that would later separate you from another human being was ever switched on. You're standing in front of a mirror. You're getting dressed. You glance down for half a second and see them. 2 small circles on your chest that do absolutely nothing, except remind you that before you were anything else, you were exactly the same as everyone else.